I'd like to talk to you about an incredible, funny story that I had with a client recently. It's my hope that what I shared with this woman is a help to you the way it was to her. She's 41 years old. She is a single mom of one. And she said, Doc, I'm reaching out to you because I'm struggling on the dating scene. I go on a lot of dates. I have no problems getting dates, but it's not going beyond the dating phase. And I don't understand why someone who is as confident and secure as I am, I'm struggling. So we dived a little bit into her background and talked a little bit about her and who she is and some of the things she's had to overcome. Eventually, we land at a place where she says, Doc, as you can see, I've done the work. I've done the work. I'm great at setting boundaries. I'm great at setting expectations when I show up in spaces and I meet people and I go on dates with them. I'm very clear from the beginning of what my boundaries and expectations are. She said, but it just always seems to fizzle out after the first date. She said, some of the dates might go to 2 dates. I said, just out of curiosity, how many dates have you been on in, say, the last 2 years? She said anywhere from 14 to 16 dates. I made a face like that and started laughing. She said, what's wrong, Doc? I said, it's a little bit more than my liking, but let's just go a little bit deeper into that. I said, you don't make it past the first or second date? She said, no, sir. And she said, obviously, I don't have a problem getting dates. She's a very attractive woman, smart, great career. She says she's been working on the 5 areas of healing. She feels pretty secure in those areas, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially. Well-spoken. I could see her being someone that men would want to date. I said, but there's a disconnect, and somehow you're not making it past date 1 or 2. And one of the things that I'm hearing glaringly loud is that you're very clear on day 1 what your expectations are, correct? She said, yes, sir. That's what we're supposed to be. That's what we're supposed to do. That's how we're supposed to show up. We're supposed to set those boundaries and expectations from the beginning. And I said, of these 14 to 16 dates, how many of them have gone to the second round, meaning a second date? She said probably 3 of them. I said, of the 16? She said, yes, sir, and started laughing. I said, okay. I said, let me share something with you that I think might help you. So what was the last plane trip or trip you've gone on? She said, recently, Doc, I went to Miami, went on a girls trip. I said, cool. So how many of you was it? She said it was about 6 of us, 6 or 7. I said, and it was just a weekend, a couple of days? She said, yes, sir, it was a weekend. I said, was that your first time in Miami? She said it was, ironically. She said she had never been to Miami all of her life. She's been to cities around Miami, but she had never been there. I said, okay, cool. I said, did you eat any places you've never ate? Obviously you have, correct? Or did? She said, yes, sir, I did. I said, when you walked up to those restaurants, what did you notice? She said, people, and started laughing. I said, yeah, besides people, what did you notice? I said, did you see anything outside, the doors or the entryways of those restaurants? She said, typically down there, they have the waiter or waitress that's standing outside that gets your party information, gets your table, stuff like that. I said, yeah, you see them. I said, what else do you normally see? She didn't get what I was getting at. She said, Doc, I'm not sure what you're asking me. I said, what else do you see or did you see when you were walking up to a lot of these restaurants in Miami? She said, I'm really lost. I said, you probably saw a menu, didn't you? She said, oh, yeah. She said, they have a menu outside. It might be inside of a stand or something or on the wall. But yeah. I said, did you all just walk in there without looking at the menu? She said, no, we always stopped and looked at the menu. I said, and what was that process like? She said, well, we looked to see what they had. And if we liked what they had and us, as a group really agreed on it and we saw something we wanted to eat, we ate there. I said, perfect. I said, did you all stop at any menus of any restaurants that you didn't like? She said it happened a couple of times. I said, what was that process like? And I'm smiling. She's still looking confused. She said, Doc, why are we talking about food? I said, just go with me. There's always a purpose. I said, what was that process like when you went to the restaurant and you saw things you didn't like? She said, we just agreed not to eat there and we went to the next one. I said, let me ask you a question. For those menus you didn't like, did you attempt to change them? She said, no, Doc. I said, why? She said, for obvious reasons, Doc. I mean, I can't change the menu. I said, oh, really? She said, no. And then she did like this and said, wait. And I was just looking at her. I said, do you get what I'm getting at? She said, I think so. I said, let me make it clear. One of the greatest signs of insecurity is attempting to change people. And while you might show up on these first dates, setting out your cards, here are my boundaries, here are my expectations. What if you meet someone who has a different set of boundaries and a different set of expectations? Does that make them a bad person? She said, no, sir. She said, I've met many guys for dates and they were great guys, but it just didn't mesh with my boundaries and expectations. I said, perfect. I said, so it didn't make you bad, did it? She said, no. I said, did it make them bad? She said, no. I said, so what was the problem? I said, did any of those guys want a second date? She said, I'm sure I could have had second dates. I said, but why didn't those second dates happen? She said, because they didn't fit with my boundaries and expectations. I said, no, you didn't like what was on the menu. She said, wow, I never looked at it that way. I said, most people don't. We show up and meet people and they show up as themselves. You show up as yourself. And what do you try to do? You try to change the menu. You try to take their life, their menu, and say, here are my expectations. And if your menu is not serving what's on my menu or list of expectations, I'm not interested. And I said, many people have missed out on great partners and potentially great mates because we show up trying to change people. If you don't go to a restaurant and try to change the menu, why do we meet people and try to change them? It could be that what they're serving on their menu is not what you like. If that's the case, have the security to tell them, listen, I don't like what you're serving. I don't think we're a great fit. I think you're a nice person, and move on to the next choice. I said, but people don't do that. What we do is we show up and say, here's my menu. Here's what I like. Here are my expectations. Here are my boundaries. And we try to make people eat from a table that they're not interested in. She said, yikes, Doc. I said, listen, a lot of people struggle here. She said, but I'm struggling though. She said, because I'm a very a confident person. I said, but you're not a secure person. She leaned back like that and said, are you serious? I said, I'm dead serious. I said, do you know the difference between being confident and secure? She said, when a person is confident, they believe in themselves. I said, okay. I said, what about secure? She said, it's when they believe in themselves. I said, absolutely not. When a person is confident, they trust in their abilities. When a person is secure, they don't try to control other people's abilities. The difference between confidence and security is that in one space, confidence, you show up secure in what you bring to the table. You show up secure in what's on your menu. When you show up secure, you show up okay with what's on their menu. And if what's on their menu is not to your liking, you do what you did in Miami. You walk away from that restaurant and you go find a restaurant that works for you. But if you don't walk up to a new restaurant and tell that restaurant what to serve, you got to stop showing up in spaces trying to tell people how to act. She started laughing. We were laughing. She said, Doc, only you could come up with something like this. I said, it's an easy way to understand how people show up trying to change people, because the greatest sign of insecurity is when we show up trying to change them. If people want to change and evolve, they will change and evolve over time. But our job is not to meet them and try to change the menu at the same time. I hope this message made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.